Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. And today, I think we have an episode that everybody is going to enjoy. We are delighted to welcome Sarah Firisen to the show. She describes herself as an accidentally successful author, but I think it is by examining what made you successful that one might be able to find out what is the route to being successful. So, Sarah, we are delighted to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Oh, well, we are excited to listen to you today. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well. Thanks, Roland. And thanks for coming on, Sarah. So, yeah, these are often my favorite episodes when we get to talk to authors about their path to success, because as we always say, there's not one road to success. A lot of people talk about, they have books and courses or whatever about how to be a successful author and this and that. But, obviously there are a ton of different factors that come into play, and you can follow those roadmaps and not have success, and you can not follow them and have great success. And so it's often, I think, more useful to hear from actual authors that have gone through the process to hear what they did, what worked for them, because other authors can then, pick and choose and say, okay, my situation is similar to that author, and or that's, what she did is very similar to something I can do, or oh, I can't go that route. That has nothing to do with me, So I like to hear these kind of stories. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself as an author, what you write, and tell us how it all began.
Sure. So I have always liked writing. I've probably got, I don't even know, 3-4 sort of partly written manuscripts sitting somewhere out in the cloud from over the years. And I always wanted to be a published author, have a book out there. That was definitely a life bucket list item. And I actually was writing a nonfiction book with a friend for a while during COVID, and we had a podcast, and I sort of had some hopes for that, but it wasn't really my genre. And over the last few years, I've got very into reading historical mysteries. I have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, and it definitely lends itself to sort of binge reading authors who have series that, go on for multiple books. And just before Christmas last year, I got laid off from my job. So I have an actual day job, and I'm in software sales, and I got laid off from it. And you can only spend so many hours a day looking for a job, at least in my field. There's sort of a limited number of jobs out there. And so I would, got my resume together, I applied for jobs, I talked to headhunters, and then I had all these hours in the day with nothing to do. And so I'm like, well, I had this idea for a historical mystery rolling around in my head for a while. I'll just start writing it and I'll see where I go. And by the time mid-March came around and I had a job offer and was about to start a job, I'd written a book. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with this? I have this new big job. I don't have time to start trying to find an agent. And honestly, I didn't really have the patience or the inclination to go through that whole process. And so I read up a little bit about Amazon publishing. I honestly, and this, when we talk about things I quickly learned, I created my own cover because I had zero expectations, absolutely none. I edited it myself, something else I wouldn't do again. And I just put it up on Amazon. And I was sort of blown away by how successful it was. And I really wasn't sure I'd sell one book, and I sold a lot more than one book. And I suddenly realized that maybe this was something I was going to do again. I was getting great reviews. People were sending me lovely emails. I had various friends and family who were now hounding me saying, when's book 2 coming? When's book 2 coming? I'm like, oh my God, created a monster here in my friends and family. And so I wrote book 2, and I'm now finishing up book 4.
Wow. So book 4, and you started this in 2020 with the pandemic.
Oh, no. I started this in January of this year.
And you have 4 books since January of this year.
And a full-time job.
Gosh, you have been a busy bee, as my mother would say.
I have been. Yes.
That's amazing. So once that first book came out, did you do any marketing or promotion? How did people discover it, do you think?
The only thing I did originally, which in hindsight was a smart thing to do, was I made it free for a week. And so it got a lot of downloads, and that got me some reviews. And of course, the great thing about a series is, assuming people like it, once they read one, they're inclined to carry on reading. So by the time I put book 2 out there for pre-orders, I got a decent number of pre-orders because I'd already built up a bit of a readership through giving away for free for a week. And over time, over the year, I think I have a lot more to learn about Facebook marketing and Amazon marketing, and that is not an easy topic. But I certainly got better at that. And over time, I do some of that. I do things like this. I've had other interviews. I will advertise in, some sort of niche book sites and newsletters. So I do some marketing. I mean, I will say, and I'm sure you guys hear this a lot, the writing the book isn't really the hard bit. It's everything else that is incredibly time consuming and doesn't necessarily speak to my strengths or interests. But if you're going to be an independently published author, to some extent, you're going to do some of those things.
I think that's fair enough. I mean, that's very true. We're almost publishing companies in ourselves.
Absolutely. I'm a publishing company who contracts with people because I now have a designer, a lovely designer who does my covers, and I have an editor. And so, I contract with people for the parts of this I can't do or shouldn't do, or just don't have the time to do. I have an audio book for book 1, and I'm doing one for book 2 now. And I hired an audio book narrator, and Roland, you will maybe sympathize with this. Various people said, "Well, you have this English accent. You should read it." I'm like, I don't have time to narrate my audio book. I've got a job. I'm writing books. I'm self-publishing this thing. I'd rather pay someone else to narrate this. So,
I think people don't appreciate, if you're a full-length book, it's maybe 10 hours of audio.
Oh, yeah.
And think to read 10 hours of audio, that's pretty an effort anyway. And then you think of, the additional things of editing it and stuff like that. So I can 100% understand.
I don't know. And, I'm not a trained actress. I mean, I don't have time to, I'm sure I would need to edit far more than my narrator, who is a trained actress, needs to edit. It's like, I don't have time for that. So yes, I feel like I am a publishing company who outsources bits of this. And I think a lot of people, certainly I had no idea that was the case. And I think a lot of people who go into self-publishing maybe don't realize just how much work the other non-writing things are.
Yeah. And a lot of authors really don't have a lot of interest in all that stuff, right? They became authors to write, not to be a marketer, a publisher, a cover designer, an editor. I mean, and like you said, you shouldn't do all of those things anyways. If your niche, if your skill set isn't cover design, then you're hurting your book more than helping it by saving yourself $100 or a couple $100 by trying to do your own cover. It's much better to hire somebody who specializes in that, give your book the best chance of success. And like you said, editing too, even editors hire editors to write, to edit their own book. You never should self-edit because you read kind of what you think you wrote.
Exactly.
Not what's actually on.
No. And I have learned that. And, Grammarly can only take you so far. It's a great tool. Thank heavens for it. But, I will say, I mean, because I didn't have the first book edited professionally, between people I know and just, people who have written to me say, hey, I found some typos in it. I mean, it's been edited slowly over time. I wouldn't say there's nothing in there, but I mean, it certainly had quite a going over. Thank heavens, Amazon lets you constantly publish. But the newer books where I've actually hired an editor who I love, I'm not saying no one ever finds anything, because I think people probably find, everything. I found a typo in the New York Times the other day, but it has been a far easier, smoother, less iterative process to make sure those books are as good as they can be.
Absolutely. So so when you published book one, then you did no advertising or marketing. You just put it for free and for the 10 days. So when that was on free, I assume you had hundreds or thousands of downloads.
Yeah.
And then when you flipped it over, when it stopped being free, the sales just continued from there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously not at that level, but one of the other things that, again, was absolute luck. I wrote historical mysteries because I like reading historical mysteries. I didn't realize until I downloaded a tool called Publisher Rocket and started sort of digging into categories that is one of the few really growing categories on Amazon. Romance being the top, but historical mysteries is a very growing category. And so I had by chance, by luck, chosen to write in a category that is very popular. And just as I use my Kindle Unlimited subscription and just sort of, once I started a series, kept going, I think a lot of people do that, particularly in this genre. Romance doesn't necessarily lend itself to a series. How many times can the same person fall in love over and over again? But historical mystery, you can just, people keep on dying and you keep on solving it. So I think I lucked out in that. I don't want to do false modesty here. I think I've written a good book. I think I'm a good writer. And, there's no category, no marketing is going to save a bad book. But I think having written a good book and finally got a nice cover, I was in a good category. And because I had had it free for a period of time, I had got a bunch of reviews, which obviously help. And then, there's the whole Amazon algorithm, which has, who knows how exactly that works, but there's a certain success breeds success on Amazon. So if you get a lot of pre-orders, suddenly I got a lot of pre-order, relatively speaking, a lot of pre-orders for book two, that immediately put book two quite high in the rankings the day it dropped, which then, so the whole thing is sort of, there's definitely some art to it and maybe some science to it. But I think all these things together helped give me some momentum and an audience waiting for future books. I mean, I will say, so, book 4 is now on pre-order. Every book has had significantly more pre-orders than the book before.
That's an encouraging sign, isn't it?
Yeah. So book 3 had more than double the pre-orders that book 2 had. And book 4, almost 2 months away from being published, has as many pre-orders as book 3 had. So, there's a nice progression here that sort of speaks to a growing audience.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a series that people like, that's one of the most lucrative ways to have a career, because you have especially if they're standalone, and mysteries most likely are, right? People could start on book 2, they can start on book 3. Absolutely. And the advantage of that is you've now, with a 4-book series, you now have 4 entry points where you could capture a new reader, and then that reader, if they enjoy it, can go and read 4 different books, right? Whereas, in a series that is not standalone, people always have to start on book 1. So it's always a matter of how do you keep finding new people to read book 1 and then hopefully follow on. So I think you did what you planned or not, you did it right.
Accidentally successful, I'm telling you.
Accidentally successful. And then I guess is your you'd mentioned you could keep falling into more mystery. So I assume, well, especially because of the series, it's one sort of Sherlock Holmesian, one sort of investigator, one sort of person who's solving these mysteries in each book, and that carries forward.
Well, so when I started writing my book 1, I thought about what I most liked in some of the books I read and what I least liked in some of the books I read. And then I tried to write the perfect book for me, because at the time I had no other audience but me. So I'm like, what book would I like to write and then to read? And what I enjoy are books where there is a mystery, but there is another storyline going underneath where there is character growth, and there is sort of an ongoing plot where then there's a mystery per book. That is what I enjoy, and that's what a lot of people write.
I know. I like Kathy Reichs with the Bones books. You know, you've got each one is a separate mystery, except you've got the ongoing relationship between her and Booth. Yeah,
exactly. So I have a hero and a heroine, and there is a sort of a burgeoning love story that goes underneath all this, and a ecosystem of people that start to be brought into their investigations. And I will say, you know, it's always nice when people say, I enjoyed the plot, I didn't see that coming, you know, it was a good mystery. But what I like more is when people say, I love the relationships between these people and how they're, you know, getting to know each other and growing as characters. And, you know, because when I read these books, that's what I most appreciate. I mean, you know, I won't name names, but there's a couple of authors that I read where, honestly, I think the plots are getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And I can imagine by the time you get to book 30, maybe I won't have as many good ideas either. But what keeps me reading is the characters are great. The relationships between the characters are great. And so it's not the greatest mystery in the world, but I'd rather read a book with a not great mystery but wonderful characters than the other way around.
I think that's a good way of looking at it.
And people remember characters that, you know, that's really what resonate with readers, is those strong characters. Exactly. So they're not even investigators, they're just people that sort of happened to
so my books are set in Victorian London in 1897, and my heroine is the recently widowed Countess of Pembroke, Tabitha, and the new Earl is her deceased husband's cousin, who she didn't know before, who was a bit of a black sheep of the family and had been cast out by his father and had been making his way in life as a thief catcher in Whitechapel, which is a pretty, or at least now it's a very fancy area of London.
Yeah, it's changed a lot.
Now, who could afford renting Whitechapel? But back then, it was, you know, Whitechapel is where the Yorkshire, not the Yorkshire Ripper, that was the Ripper murders took place in London in the 1880s. You know, it was a very poor, very crime-ridden area. So he had been working this very you know, downhill job, and suddenly is the Earl. But some characters from his past try to draw him back into an investigation, even though his plan is that now he's the Earl, he won't be doing this anymore. And Tabitha, the Countess, gets drawn in, and then other people in their lives get drawn in. And so they are, at least in the beginning, unwilling investigators who are forced to do this, but then over time become a little bit more willing about doing this.
Yeah, that's another good trope, I think, you know, the unwilling hero.
The unwilling hero.
Yeah. So do you do a lot of research, you know, for, I guess with historical stuff, I always imagine that you want to get as much right as you can. Obviously, you're changing facts because you're putting in a story into that time that didn't exist, and sometimes you're interacting with characters that did exist in the time. But to the degree that you can, I imagine you want to have all your historical facts in place.
Absolutely. And you know, Google is a wonderful thing, but you know, one of the things that we've been doing recently, so my daughter, who lives in London, helps me out with social media and research and various things like that. And for book 3 and for book 4, we went on, so book 3 is set in Scotland, and we went on a trip to Edinburgh and did some research and went to some museums and you know, saw some places that I was then able to describe because I'd really been there. Book 4 is set in Brighton, and we had a wonderful weekend in Brighton. My friend who lives in Brighton is a big fan of the series, and which was very excited when she heard we were coming. And she did all this research about all these different places we should go and visit. And so that was a lot of fun to have tea in the hotel that the characters stay in, and to, walk up to the bandstand that, one of the scenes takes place in. So, I do try and to do some of that where I can. We did a nice little trip to the Victoria and Albert Museum, which has some wonderful paraphernalia of the era, the cutlery they used and the clothes they wore. And so I do try to, within the bounds of the fact that, this is fiction and not a history book, be true to the period as much as I can be.
Yeah, that I think helps a lot as well, right?
Absolutely.
It's interesting because, we often talk about the rate of reviews that you get organically. For most authors, it's historically pretty low. And you were mentioning how you put the book on for free for a week and you got a lot of reviews. So to put that in perspective, what are, I don't know if you know offhand, like, full numbers, but maybe you can give us sort of an idea or a ratio or whatever of like how many free copies you moved and versus how many reviews you got out of that, even roughly.
I honestly don't remember because it was a few books and a bunch of time ago, but it was enough. And certainly, as you know, with Amazon, people can often give a rating without a review. So I quickly got a good rating with enough people doing it, that then you compounded that with the fact that some people had actually written a review. There was something there for Amazon to react to and for people to see. So I honestly don't remember what it was, but it was decent. I mean,
yeah,
more anything more than zero would have been more than I expected. So it was decent.
Right. No, I think, because part of the problem is, with their ranking system, free has a different rank than paid. So sometimes when you put a book for free, it does really well and people download it and goes to the top of the free ranking. But then as soon as it flips back over to pay,
Absolutely.
that ranking doesn't stay, right?
And I didn't get the high rankings immediately.
Right.
That definitely came over time, but I got reviews pretty quickly from the free. And that then, when people started actually buying it, sort of was positive reinforcement.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that people overlook is you probably have to have a really strong concept and hook for your book for that to be successful.
Look, I think that if there was ever an area where there's no quick way to success, it is writing books. I know people are, there's all this, can AI do it and whatever. I mean, AI can write a book. Can AI write a best-selling book? No, not now at least. There is something very human about writing a good story, not just a story, but a good story. I think that, again, totally accidentally, by writing for myself, it turns out there's a lot of people who like what I like out there. And so I seem to have, by a wonderful bit of luck, written for a lot of other people as well.
I love that.
Absolutely. And so do you have any plans, or is it even something you're interested in to, quit your day job and write full time?
Yeah, well, I'm of a certain age. And so while I actually love my day job, I'm not going to do it forever. And, I work in an industry that is pretty volatile. I mean, I lost a job last year. I have decided, if for some reason this job didn't work out, this would be the last job I would get. I would not go back on the marketplace. And I should say, I've got a pretty successful career. But I've also decided that if, as I hope, this job keeps going for some number of years, this is sort of the retirement plan in not that many years, is, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is, that this is what I will then do once I'm no longer working. So one way or another, this will be the last job I ever have.
That's great. Yeah, I love it when you have that option, when authors are doing
lucky.
well enough to do that if they decide to, right? It's not forever.
No, I am very, very lucky. And also, I mean, I do want to, I hope this continues. I hope the books continue to do well, but it hasn't even been a full year. It is possible this is all going to disappear, and I would be foolish to quit a very, successful career yet. But even a few years' time, this is still doing well. I start to hit my late 50s, early 60s. I don't need to be working forever. This is the plan.
It's a very good plan.
Yeah.
What I always say, you should burn the boats. When you land on the beach, you burn the boats, and then you can't help but press forward.
Well, that's true. That's true. That is one way of looking at it.
Well, listen, it's good to have options, right? So
yes.
So what do you have some tips for other authors that are sort of just getting started on, maybe lessons learned and how they can sort of, some of the tips that you think that might help someone else have some success?
Oh, as I say, and you had reiterated, finding someone. I have a wonderful freelance designer who is extremely reasonably priced and does a lovely job with my book covers. And I should have done that from day one. And, I see a lot of people using Canva, trying to do their own book covers. And look, there are lots of people who have lots more design talent than I have. But I would say it was absolutely worth it to get a good cover. The editor was worth it. That is a more expensive proposition, and I realize it's not for everyone. Particularly, if I went back, rolled the clock back to March of this year, not knowing that the book was going to do well, would I have dropped that amount of money on an editor? Absolutely not. I wouldn't have. So I understand people's reticence to do that, because any decent editor is not cheap. I will say I think he's reasonable, but he's not cheap. So, if this is an entirely speculative thing for someone, I can see why they might balk at that. But I will say it was definitely worth it. Understanding how Amazon works to some extent around the categories and keywords, that's something I'm still learning, but I'm getting better at. I wish I'd learned some of that earlier. And, giving it away free for a week, at least for me, really did help. And that's an option that Amazon gives you when you launch it. And I'm glad I did it. I think again, I stumbled blindly into accidentally doing something that was a smart thing.
Yeah. And it worked out because, like I said, you don't always get a lot of reviews from free
I'm
books.
sure.
It could be that certain genres maybe are better than others. If historical mysteries is a growing genre, could be that the people that are reading it are sort of more excited. It's like there's less books in there, and so they're more willing to spend some time giving recommendations to their friends.
Absolutely. I will say something that I've realized over time, which again I don't think I realized back then, was I now have an extremely good sense who my audience is. A really good sense. I know my age, my audience is women. That may not be terribly surprising, of my age and up. Far more in the US than the UK. The US is my biggest market. I guess Brits love all things, Americans love all things British. Maybe Brits like things American, I don't know. Britain is definitely, the UK is definitely my second audience, but the US, which of course is a huge audience. So one of the things I try to do in everything, in my marketing, in various choices that I make, is to be cognizant of who my audience is. Because they are a certain type of person looking for a certain type of thing. And at the end of the day, and maybe, this is what I say to a lot of people, because I have friends who, want to be writers or are writers but want to be published. And they ask me, I said, look, I didn't make this decision in the beginning, but if I had, I would have made the same one, which is, do you want to write to win a Pulitzer or whatever, book a prize? Or do you want to write to make money and be a successful writer? And sometimes for some people, those are the same thing, but for a lot of writers, it's not the same thing. If you want to write what you want to write and you don't care what anyone else thinks of it because you have this story burning itself inside of you, write it, see if someone will publish it. If they don't, self-publish it and see if someone will buy it. But if what you want to do is to find an audience and make a living of writing to that, knowing your audience, knowing your genre, and being mindful of what people are looking for from that genre, from that audience category, I think is very important.
I couldn't agree more. That is one of the first questions that I ask whenever somebody contacts me to do a consult call to help them, to coach them. That's one of the first questions I ask is, why are you writing? Is it because you have a story to tell and you just don't care about the commercial success, you just want to tell stories? That's perfectly fine. Or is it that you want to make as much money as possible? That's also fine. Two completely different paths, both valid, but they require different advice.
100% different advice, different mindset about writing, different mindset about everything. And I think, a lot of people naively, and I don't discount myself out of that, think in the beginning you can kind of maybe be both. And I think it is a very small group of people who manage to be both. You're either sort of a populist writer giving the people what they want, or you're Ernest Hemingway. And if Ernest Hemingway wrote today, he probably wouldn't have been very successful.
Well, he could self-publish at least.
He could self-publish. There you go. Ernest Hemingway self-publishing.
Yeah. Did you ever use beta readers?
It's funny. I haven't, or I hadn't. And then there was one lovely woman who, for books 1 and 2, had sent me some typos she found, and she organized them in a particularly helpful way, which is not always the case. And she was just very sweet, and we were sort of chatting back and forth. And I said to her, "Look, I'm really grateful that you've done this. Given that you're seen to be prepared to do this, would you be prepared to do this before the book is published and actually give me some feedback on it?" And she said she was happy to. So after book 3 went through the editor, I sent it to her, and she gave me some feedback, and we're going to do it again. So that's one beta reader, but it's very helpful.
Yeah, I was just wondering because, when you have such a successful, when you hit the markets so successfully as you have from the get-go, a lot of the times, one of the ways to sort of help that process along is get some beta readers that read that genre so that they can give you the feedback, especially if you haven't, spent a lot of time writing in that genre before.
Yeah. Look, as I say, I that is not something where I would say I did what I would suggest everyone else do. I seem to have lucked out in, finding my sweet spot. And to some extent, I don't want to mess with success. I don't want too many voices telling me I don't want this or I don't want that. I want to make sure that it's structurally sound, and that a couple of people who've read it said, yeah, that makes sense. I like that story. And then just sort of, to some extent, go with what worked before, which is my gut, which is this is a good story that people want to read. And at least so far, that's worked out well for me. But I do think that's probably luck more than anything. Luck and good, decent writing.
You're on mute there.
Yeah, luck and having a good idea for a story. It's the concept that's so important.
Yes, absolutely.
Did you write your own blurb, or did you have anyone help you with that?
I wrote my own blurb. It's funny, I just changed it slightly today. I would say, while I consider myself, a good writer, I'm not a particularly good copywriter, and I'm constantly trying to tweak my marketing and things like that, because I'm not sure I'm as good at writing something in 150 characters or so as I am at writing it in 80,000 words. And so I may at some point have to sort of get someone to help me with that as well. But yeah, I would say, again, just because you can write a book doesn't mean you can write copy, and they are definitely different things.
Well, it's not a tweet. You have more than 140 characters.
Yeah, well, but, sort of,
Right,
whether it's,
no.
I have the same challenges with the blurb and with marketing.
Right.
Amazon ads as like 150 characters or something. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's very, very common.
Yeah,
I
had
mean,
to be
it is
pithy and catchy.
It's a different skill set altogether.
Yes, very different skill set, and I definitely recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to distill something that you spent probably months writing into a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
And as the writer, sometimes you're a little too close to it. What I find a lot of the times is the writers, when they write their blurbs, often include a lot of unnecessary information.
Yes.
Right. And you want to distill it down into sort of like that hook, that elevator pitch that is going to grab people, not every sort of thing that happened in the book. Yeah.
Now,
You want to whet their appetite.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Right. Roland's the expert at that. He, that's
I've worked as a commercial copywriter for 20 years, so you do learn. I mean, it is a particular skill that is very different to writing.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. And then you found a cover designer, and has the same designer done all of your books?
Yes, she does the books. She does the audio books. And what she's very good at is, when I did my first design, which was really awful, but I liked my concept. I just wasn't any good at executing it. And so I told her what my concept was, and she executed it 1,000 times better than I did, 1,000,000 times better than I did. So now what I do is I say to her, okay, this book is set in Brighton. I said to her for book 4, this book's set in Brighton. I want to use the Royal Pavilion as the backdrop. Which is a very iconic building in Brighton, if you don't know, Craig. And, I sent her photos of the Royal Pavilion. I'm like, this is what I want the background to be. And then she came back and we talked about color schemes. And so it's become a good collaboration.
Right. Yeah, that is, when you find an artist, or actually it's for anything, you find a cover designer that works well with you. You find an editor that works well with you, and a blurb writer that works, stick with them, because
absolutely.
They're not all the same.
No, I took me, my first efforts with an editor were awful and mostly a waste of money. And I learned a lot of lessons. And so the second editor I found, I love him. And he's just easy to work with and does a great job and is very he seems to be a nice person to collaborate with. And so now I've got him. It's like, now I've got my audiobook narrator. I found the right people. And once you find the right people, don't let them go.
Absolutely. So what have you in book 1, maybe you did this, and hopefully not. If you didn't, you have since then. Did you start creating a mailing list, and so that you can grow your own audience and be able to contact them and let them know every time there's a new book, or you have some kind of other thing going on? And what sort of how has that worked for you?
So I didn't do it for book 1, and but I realized I needed to do it. I mean, I will say it is good. I've got a decent number of names on it. It's definitely one of the areas I'm more challenged at. How do you get people, not just names on it, but people who actually want to hear from you? It's probably not hard to buy a list of names. It's hard to buy a list of names of people who might actually be interested in hearing from you on a regular basis. But now I do that. I decided to spring for, I use software called MailChimp, which allows me to get people to sign up for my webpage, and I can automate emails through it, and I can write the newsletters and have various automations. And actually, I like that. It works well. And so, so I now send a regular newsletter out. I would say that is definitely a work in progress in terms of me trying to find out what that audience wants to hear and how I can keep them engaged. But I do it, and I would suggest people do it. And obviously, I have a Facebook page, I have a Twitter handle, I have an Instagram page. I even, thanks to my daughter, have a TikTok page.
Ooh, TikTok! Wow.
Well,
the way of the future.
Let me tell you, I've been banned. I'm not allowed to post. I'm not allowed to make my own videos, and I'm not allowed to post anything to Facebook. Everything has to go through my daughter. She is very bossy, and she has banned me from. She said, I don't know what the young people want, which is probably right, and everything needs to go through her. So I'm very lucky that I have her helping me.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like you haven't even scratched the surface of success, because you talk about, you've got a subscriber list, but you're not sure. I mean, to many authors have built an entire career off their subscriber list alone. So to have all the success you've built up already and have an as yet unrealized potential with your subscriber list is kind of exciting.
It is exciting. It is very exciting. Something my husband said to me the other day, how many more of these books are you going to keep writing? I said, well, I mean, it's a decent question. I guess I'll keep writing them for as long as I enjoy writing them. And more to the point, people seem to enjoy reading them and are buying them. And so I don't know how long that is. But it is exciting to think about where I might take these characters, where I might take the books, and I mean, the audiobook is a relatively new thing for me, and that's been an exciting way to branch out into a different kind of audience. So yeah, it is all very exciting. I hope there is a lot of future growth ahead of me.
Well, so do we.
Sounds like there will be. Yeah. How many people are on that list, on your mailing list now?
I've got just under 100 now, which is not very much. But as I say, I haven't been doing it very long. But I that is definitely an area I want to understand more. How do people, I do various things on social media to drive people to it. There is a link. Something that I have started doing, which has been very helpful, is that I've started writing short stories that go to people on my mailing list. And every time I have a new short story, I post on Twitter, if you're interested in reading short story, sign up for my mailing list. And that's what it says on the website, is for, some free short stories. So I found that is both, that gives back something to my readers to say, you get something special that no one else gets, but it also hopefully gives people an incentive to sign up. So that's something I'm continuing to do more of.
Absolutely. Right. And I think I've always said that, anybody has the potential to be a successful writer if they learn the craft of writing, which is easier said than done, and then just follow the process of successful self-publishing. I mean, it seems like there are different avenues to approach, but it is just a process, and you seem to have stumbled across that, but are building on it as you go forward.
Definitely stumbled. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, we are approaching the top of the hour, so this has been a wonderful and fascinating conversation. Before we wrap up, Craig, do you have any final thoughts or anything like that?
Listen, I think that, Sarah, you've done incredibly well for somebody who did it by accident. But it speaks a lot to the quality of the book. If the book wasn't a well-written book, I am confident in saying you would not have had this kind of success. But at the same time, there are lots of people that write really good books that just never get discovered. So, you definitely hit upon some of the right things to do. You kind of need both these days, because the marketplace, Amazon marketplace, everywhere, there's so much content out there that you can get lost in a sea of other books. So even if you have, there could be some amazing novels out there that nobody's ever discovered, really, because they just fail at the marketing side of it. So it's great that this all worked out for you. So thanks for coming on and sharing your story. I think that this really will give other authors some inspiration, motivation to
I hope so.
Continue on, right?
Something I should add is that I don't write under my name. I write under the name Sarah F. Noel. So if anyone is looking for the books, it's Sarah F. Noel.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Before we wrap up, where can everybody find you, Sarah?
Right. You can find them. It is the Tabitha and Wolf mystery series. Book 1 is A Proud Woman, and I write as Sarah F. Noel.
Well, we will pop a link down below in the description.
Wonderful.
So everyone can find your work. And thank you so much for sharing everything.
It's my pleasure.
I think people will find this a really valuable episode. People really like the ones where they're writers who've achieved a certain level of success that many other writers aspire to, and kind of like gives them the inspiration to get there. So thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. And if you've appreciated what Sarah has to say, make sure you drop down and leave a comment in the comment section down below. While you're down there, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. There's the like button. It's a little bell notification, so you get to learn about every single episode of Fully Booked when they drop. And of course, we'll be back next week with another episode. So until then, cheerio.